now by political analyst Professor Tim Wilson to discuss this further. Professor Wilson, thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you very much for having me.
So to start off, I'd just like to hear your thoughts on this. Putin has done what he had been saying for a long time that he would do, what some of us didn't expect, some did. So what are your thoughts about overall what this situation is like and how we perhaps grossly did not anticipate this?
Well, that's the point. We really didn't anticipate this, but Mr. Putin has not acted out of character. We saw him acting in Georgia. We saw him taking the Crimea, but I think this isn't going his way. What the last week has shown is a weak Russia that has become the sick man of Europe. It's a dying power with a despot at its helm, aggressively pursuing some sort of agendum in the twilight of madness or illness. I strongly believe this is Mr. Putin's dying act, and like a James Bond villain, he will take out anyone who contradicts him or stands in his way. This is not, we're not in a position of safety at all. Either he will use this to do what I think he set up to do, which was to secure his next election by appearing as a strong leader in Russia and to distract from the trial of Alexei Navalny, or he will rage against world order, and this may cause significant damage, even to the point of the use of nuclear weapons. Though I think it is important to say that in Sergei Lavrov's a presentation today, he did rule out any sort of nuclear strike. He said that this scenario was not on the table. So that's reassuring. But how can one trust what anybody says from the Kremlin? I don't know. The whole Russian military machine is debunked. They are not telling their own country what is happening. They're not giving the country figures of the enormous number of Russian dead. And yet on the battlefield, we're learning that Russian soldiers, are refusing to kill their brother Slavs. Maybe the soldiers on the field are more sensible than the people, the cowards in the bunker up in the Kremlin. Many soldiers have got family in Ukraine, and they can see at first hand the damage that is being caused to this neighboring country. For what purpose? So Mr. Lavrov and the Kremlin are now putting out propaganda. They're changing the message and the narrative, and this is very interesting. They're setting up new missions. We see the 1 million refugees. We see the attack on Kherson. We also know about the issue. Well, in fact, I'll talk about that in a minute. But the issue with people of colour being stopped at the border, the Polish border, which is quite shocking. But it's the propaganda, because the strategy in Ukraine has not gone according to Mr. Putin's plan. So Putin is rewriting history. And today at 12 noon, an order went out for all school children to watch the television, to watch a Kremlin broadcast, pure propaganda, and teachers were given notes about what they should be teaching for the next few weeks, about how NATO has threatened Russia, how Russia has gone to the defense of the small Russian community in Ukraine, how there is so much fake news, and these are the news services that you should consult. But genuine information is available to Russians, if they look on the internet. So this propaganda effort, I think in the long run will be futile. But at the moment, those people who are relying on state broadcast and state media, they're being fed a diet of very firm propaganda, and they believe They believe this is the right thing to do. So the Western assumption that this war can be over very quickly and that the public will turn against Mr. Putin, I think, is wrong. And yet, at the same time, I also think this war is definitely not going in Putin's favor. What happens next, I think, is very dangerous. But I also don't think the Kremlin can bank in the long term on the level of naivety or a sort of belief in their government, no matter how high the rating is said to be for Mr. Putin at the moment. At the moment, it's supposed to be 70%. It's gone up a few percentage in the last few weeks. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea of. I simply don't know. But I don't think that the Kremlin can bank on maintaining this propaganda offensive. I think it will collapse, and I think when it does collapse, there will be a reckoning, and then Mr. Putin will have his back against the wall, and God knows what happens at that point. I said I wanted to. So I think on the one hand, there's the issue with propaganda, which you covered very well. On the other hand, there's the issue of refugees, and we're looking at refugees at the moment. And I think there is the issue of how many refugees are fleeing Ukraine, but there's also the issue of where they're going and how they're being treated. And I think both the EU and Britain have a great deal to do. The EU says that a Ukrainian passport is enough for a person to be welcomed to the EU for 3 years. Well, that's not quite the open invitation and the open welcome that international agreements would envisage for refugees. And the UK, I think, is even further away from those international agreements. The UK is completely wrong to restrict refugee status or in fact visa status only to those who already have family links. So both the UK and the EU, I think, need to go further. They need to provide full refugee status to Ukrainian asylum seekers so they can have a right to work and a right to services. And I think there can be no doubt that these people are facing a genuine crisis and therefore have a genuine need. It's not, as for the Polish border issue, Polish border, Hungarian border, Romanian border, I think, and also the border of Belarus, people of colour have been turned away or put to the back of the queue. And this is really quite shocking. When it comes to the refugee issue, it is need that dictates what happens, not race or religion. And you in Turkey know this very well because you've taken so many Syrian refugees. So I think we have some lessons to learn at this end of the EU, or beyond the EU in the UK as well.
Indeed, you've covered a lot of ground in that answer, but pretty much.
I'm so sorry.
I had to discuss all these issues, and I think you have covered pretty much most of it. But I will try to delve more into detail over it. No, it's very informative. So I'd like you to elaborate a little more on this. When we get to the fact of Vladimir Putin, and perhaps he has made a gross miscalculation in terms of how easy this war was supposed to be. It seems that perhaps if things are not going his way, he may appear wounded and be boxed in. And yes, of course, when somebody is boxed in, they tend to either retire or they tend to fight back more aggressively. So, I mean, how dangerous is Putin if he is boxed in from the rest of the world? Nobody on his side. What kind of worst case scenarios could we see? But you're saying that Lavrov said nuclear option is off the table. But what else could he do in order to present himself as if he is winning this war? What could we see from Russia if he is boxed in? How much more aggressive could he get?
Well, I think the fact that Lavrov has said the nuclear option is off the table, I don't think we should necessarily believe that, and we certainly shouldn't work on the principle that is true. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have seen the use of completely illegal or shocking weapons like the vacuum weapon, like the cluster bombs. We've seen what appears to be definite war crimes, and it's interesting the International Criminal Court has already started investigating war crimes going back to November 2013, I think. So they've already sent people out to Ukraine to collect evidence. Now, of course, Russia is not a signatory to that agreement, but we've seen that nobody in this world now can remain completely completely isolated. Of course, we are now talking about the isolation of Russia, but I think people will be brought to justice, and President Zelensky has made it quite clear that he will expect proper reparations. He will expect all the houses damaged to be repaired, because it's completely clear from the television footage that civilians are being attacked. And even there is no way. So, for example, with Mariupol on the coast, the other sea city, the railway line has been blasted, so no one can leave. The main road out of the city has been destroyed. So to bombard that city with shells, which is what they are doing, they are attacking civilians. And there is no excuse for that.
Indeed. Now, one question I want to ask you, you already did speak a lot about this earlier, is the plight of refugees, of course. But there's various aspects to this, some of which you touched upon. Now, when we look at of course, with this conflict right now, there's going to be a large influx of refugees going out of Ukraine into bordering countries such as Poland, Hungary, et cetera, et cetera. And Europe, of course, has been suffering, going through a migration crisis over the last few months right now. So a few things I want to know. One, are those countries ready to take these refugees in? We are, of course, seeing a lot of them are being taken in. But then there's things that you did mention, which was I want to talk about the racial aspect of welcoming refugees. Not just the reports we've seen recently of African refugees and the acts of racism that have been committed over there, but also when we look at the Polish border, it's only about a month or two ago, there were refugees from Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, traveled long distances to get there, and they were left out in the freezing cold and beaten sometimes. But now with this, we see how quickly Poland is welcoming in refugees from Ukraine, which of course nobody should be a victim of war. And of course, all refugees should be welcomed in. But what does that go to show about, the perhaps welcoming in refugees from one neighborhood as opposed to the other? What is that perception? Why is it that certain refugees are welcomed in and certain aren't? I don't want to use the word, but what do you think that implies?
Well, I'm afraid I think you put the finger right on the heart of the problem. Certain refugees are welcomed and certain refugees are not, and it seems to be defined by race and color. And
before you get, I want to stop you right there. But did you also see that video that has been making its rounds on social media of certain reporters from CNBC, NBC, other international reporters in Kiev who use words like, "These are civilized people. They're not from third world developing countries." And these are mainstream news media outlets who have said things like, "These are the Europeans who live right next door to you. You know, they're not from Afghanistan or Iraq." Such blatant kind of language on mainstream media. So that's another aspect. Please continue. No.
Absolutely. I've seen a video where people are saying, but we are students. The point is there's racial stereotyping, and there is the spread of belief across Europe and across the UK that one type of refugee is acceptable and another type of refugee is not acceptable. And this is abhorrent. The whole idea of refuge is that we give to people who need it, not we don't give to people who we choose to accept. It's people who are in need, they appeal for our help, and it's a mark of our civilization. And if we can't rise to that, I'm afraid we are no longer a civilized country. We are no longer a civilized people.
Professor Multa, I'm going to have to stop you right there. We're experiencing some disturbance in your audio right now, but we're going to go to a news package, and I want you to come back and answer that question again in a bit. All right, so right now, satellite imagery has shown Russian ground forces moving closer to Ukraine's capital with a military convoy that stretches over 17 miles.
Satellite imagery released by Maxar on Wednesday shows the detailed impact on Ukraine of Russia's military invasion. Heavy cloud cover over Ukraine has prevented Maxar from publishing new images, causing them to instead closely inspect the high-resolution imagery taken by 3 satellites in the preceding days. The newly released images from across Ukraine show examples of heavy damaged homes, residential areas and businesses, as well as long lines of people waiting outside supermarkets. They also show the build-up of activity at several border crossings into neighbouring Hungary, Slovakia and Romania.
Clearly, the Russian forces were sent into Ukraine with the expectation that this would be quick, that their infiltrated special forces and operatives would be able to decapitate the Ukrainian government, both at the national and the local level, and therefore the troops could kind of be brought in without having to fight their way into the cities.
Russian troops are in the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson and forced their way into the council building after a day of conflicting claims over whether Moscow had made the first major gain of a city in its 8-day-long invasion. The invasion was denounced by the United Nations in a historic vote as global brands exited Russia and the ruble hit record lows.
We still have to face the fact that the U.S. gas and oil are generally higher cost and lower quality comparing to the Russian ones. If with the current level of conflict, people would have more interest and higher tolerance for such higher cost. But once the situation normalized, I believe the cost conscious sentiment will come back.
All right, welcome back. We're going to continue our conversation with Professor Tim Wilson. Professor, thank you for your patience and still being with us. I'm going to let you go soon, but I just had that one more question to ask, and which I already did, so I'd like you to continue with your answer on the racial aspect of when we see the refugee crisis.
Yes. Well, I believe it's a moral issue, and I believe for some reason there's been a move away from seeing refugees as a moral, as something that is moral and that we need to shoulder. If you look at the present crisis with Ukraine, we've also still got the Afghan crisis with a huge number of refugees coming out of Afghanistan or stuck within Afghanistan. A crisis with people starving in Afghanistan. They need our help. There's still the Syrian crisis. These crises have not gone away. I think there's another 55 civil wars around the world. There's a series of major conflicts around the world. So the refugee issue needs to be sorted out, and we cannot hide behind these ridiculous formulae. This type of refugee is acceptable for 3 years, and somebody who has family, and the family is defined in a very limited way. So Boris Johnson is standing up and saying, we stand shoulder to shoulder with our Ukrainian friends, and then refusing them refuge. It makes no sense. This shows up the very unprincipled and aggressive nature of our Home Secretary, Priti Patel, and the completely inept approach of our current Foreign Secretary, who has caused so much damage because she simply doesn't prepare what she's going to say. And it's this lack of professionalism, along with sloganizing, which is causing so many problems, particularly with the refugee crisis. As I say, the refugees are not going to go away. If anything, the problem is getting worse. I think we've got more refugees now than we had at the end of World War II.
Indeed.
So we have to find a way of dealing with this.
Indeed, and if the situation gets worse, do you think we've seen shades of this right now? But if the situation gets worse, we might see further acts of that kind of showcase a refugee preference, and perhaps we could see more aggressive acts against refugees of a certain color as opposed to the others, a priority list for in terms of what kind of refugees to welcome in. Do you think those fault lines in Europe could be expanded more if this situation gets worse? Because there are refugees from other countries who are also trying to get into Europe, but preferential treatment would be given to those of a certain neighborhood.
Yes, I'm afraid I think you're going down. It's a rabbit hole I would rather not enter. But you know, as far as Poland is concerned, in this current crisis, I would hope that the former foreign minister of Poland, Radek Sikorski, who is very familiar with Britain. He was at Oxford with Boris Johnson. I would hope that Boris would talk to Radek and see if the British government can do something to help these people of colour immediately. That would be a step in the right direction. We cannot allow these people to be stranded on the border simply because of the colour of their skin or their religion. This is unprincipled. And the same comment I would make for every single conflict area where there are refugees. We need to deal with this issue, and I'm afraid Brexit has taken us down a very, very strange and worrying route. And I'm afraid the refugee crisis in Europe has exhibited something which is disturbing. Accepting refugees is a moral issue. It's not really a political issue. Of course, it's become a political cricket ball. It's being thrown all over the place. At the moment, I think this might be resolved within the Ukrainian situation. But there are pictures of people of colour hiding in cellars in these cities that are being bombed at the moment, with nowhere to go and no hope. And I think as those pictures get out on the media, I'm hoping the public will respond and demand that the governments in Britain and across Europe do something to help.
Indeed, it is a tragic situation. With that, I'm going to let you go, Professor Wilson, but always an insightful conversation having you over. Thank you so much for taking out the time to speak to us, and I hope to speak to you again sometime soon.
Thank you so much.
Always. Now, the Pentagon says it would post